After the war, George Headley was made captain for the 1948 home series against England, an extraordinary achievement for a black cricketer.
It was a great honour for somebody black in those days because, they probably thought that we didn't, the leaders, the black people were not very good leaders, and for him to be elevated to that position was a landmark for West Indies cricket.
In 1954, Headley, who had been coaching and playing league cricket in England, came home for his last test.
Headley's status as a man and as a cricketer in Jamaica is still around. I mean, the main grandstand at Sabina Park is the George Headley stand, and probably the greatest example of just how highly he's regarded there came in the 53-54 series, when Headley had been playing league cricket in England and hadn't played a test match since 1948.
The public in Jamaica actually had an appeal to try and get him back to the Caribbean to play in the series in 1953-54 against Len Hutton's side, even though at that time he was 45 and coaching and playing league cricket in England. There was a public subscription which raised over £1,000 and they brought him back to play in that series, but of course at the age of 45 he really was past his best. But that gives an illustration of the regard in which he was held and the quality of the player that he was.
People wanted George Headley back in Jamaica to again lead the way. So our youngsters could look up on George Headley and said, if this man can achieve so much, so can I. He was supposed to be a role model. People wanted him back there so he could continue that role. People didn't want him in England, far away from Jamaica. No youngsters in Jamaica being able to get close to him to see what he was achieving and to believe that they could achieve as well. So that is why they had this big campaign to get him back home, even at that age. He certainly couldn't have produced his best at that age, but just to have him around was a big thing for the people of Jamaica.
All who met the great man were left with a lasting impression.
I met George in '81, and I'm so glad that I did. I spent the day with him in Bridgetown watching a test match. He had a great sense of humour, but he also had a sense of fair play. And one of the English batsmen, Gower or Willie, was given out to a patently poor decision, and George said to me, "Man, that spoils it for me." And I was impressed by that because it showed that unlike everyone around us, he wasn't being one-eyed about it. He cherished cricket. Cricket had given him a lot, and he'd given a lot to cricket.
I had the opportunity to meet George Headley once. We were at a function at the Kingston Cricket Club at the ground at Sabina Park. I'd been just talking to George for a couple of minutes, and I realised that he was very interesting to talk to him about cricket, but he was also quite a character, and he had interesting stories to tell. And it's a very fond cricketing memory of the night that I had a long chat with George Headley.
George, a very nice guy. He's had sons and grandsons playing English county cricket. But very nice guy and extremely modest about his own performances.
I spent a little bit of time with him. When you have someone like George Headley and you're a youngster, you're a teenager, you tend to stay in the background and try and listen to what is happening around him. So that was my early contact with him. But at the same time, early in my life, I won an award at Melbourne at the prize giving ceremony, at the presentation dinner. They asked George Headley to give me my prize, which was one of the greatest things that ever happened to me. When George Headley handed me whatever I was getting, I wasn't even focusing on what I was getting. I was focusing on the fact that George Headley was giving me my prize. It meant so much to me. What meant even more to me was perhaps a few days later or a week or so after. He then presented me with a picture of him handing me my prize. On the back of that picture, he had written, "Play cricket and see the world." Now, I have played cricket, I have seen the world.
Headley died in 1983, remembered as one of the finest batsmen of any era, and the man who carried West Indian cricket in those difficult early years.
Headley was the first of the great West Indies batsmen. He set the pattern for those who followed, so that after the war, in the interterritorial tournaments back home. You had the 3Ws coming through, you had J.K. Holt from Jamaica. He set the example, George Headley, and the rest then followed. So he was the one who led the way.
George Headley played 22 test matches, scoring 2,190 runs. He averaged 60.83. Only Don Bradman and Graham Pollock finished with higher averages. Leaving out his 3 post-war tests, his average was 64.7. He earned his nickname Atlas for scoring 10 of the first 14 centuries made by West Indian batsmen. And in the 35 innings in which he batted before the war, he top-scored on 15 occasions.
I think he lost his best years to the war. The war deprived him of a lot of great years where he could have made a lot more runs and perhaps have even a better record, but his record is great anyway.
I still regard him as probably the greatest West Indian batsman, for the simple reason that he didn't have the support that later great batsmen from the Caribbean had. He did it almost single-handed, and he made 10 test centuries in 20 test matches. Unfortunately, he came back after the war when he was past it, but if you look at his record during the 1930s, late 20s to the war, he was fantastic. He made 100 in each innings in a test at Lord's against a good England attack. Very small man, nimble on his feet, big appetite for runs, and to get to meet him and to, for once, not to be let down, because often you meet the great performers and they do disappoint you, but I'm proud of that day I spent with George.
Had he played in the modern era, he would certainly have been the West Indian captain, and he would have played many more test matches. But a strong case can be argued that of all the glorious batsmen to have graced West Indian cricket, George Headley was the greatest. For his talent, his intelligence, and his grace in the face of injustice, George Headley is one of ESPN's legends of cricket.